Hello and welcome to the West Asia Post. I am Ghadi Francis. This is our weekly show where we bring you all the latest updates, stories and news from the most volatile region in the world, West Asia. Well, for the past few weeks, West Asia is witnessing major reshuffling. After the two rivals, Saudi Arabia and Iran, met in China and resumed their relationships, this week we cover a top story of a different kind. It is about Syria. After more than a decade of war, it looks like Syria is coming back to the Arab fold. In the past week, a major presidential visit to the UAE was followed by a Saudi Arabian decision to reopen the embassy in Damascus. What does all this mean? Let's take a look. Bashar al-Assad, president of the Syrian Arab Republic, visited the UAE on Sunday for the second time. Assad received a ceremonial welcome in Abu Dhabi. Fighter jets escorted the Syrian delegation into the UAE airspace. Assad was welcomed by the UAE's president, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed, on the tarmac. And in a rare public appearance, UAE's First Lady, Sheikha Fatima bint Mubarak, personally welcomed Syria's First Lady, Asma al-Assad. The display of welcome and warmth was enough of a signal that the UAE is more than ready to reintegrate Syria back into the Arab fold. In 2011, Syria was expelled from the Cairo-based Arab League following Assad's crackdown on the uprising. Since then, Syria has been diplomatically isolated from its Arab neighbors and the West. The visit to the UAE followed Assad's trip to Russia last week and to Oman last month.
I would like to express the gratitude of the Syrian people to you and to the Russian government for the firm positions regarding the war in Syria. These positions are based on the territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic and the sovereignty of its state, the denouncement of terrorism and the refusal of the presence of foreign forces on its soil.
While the UAE opened its arms to Assad in 2018, it was the earthquake that seems to have given a momentum to the discussion. Last month, the UAE's foreign minister was the first to visit Damascus following the disaster. Several other Arab officials have since met with Assad in a gesture of solidarity. The UAE is spearheading the delivery of relief aid to Syria. It is also trying to mediate between Syria and major regional powers, such as Saudi Arabia. Analysts say it was due to the efforts of the UAE that Riyadh finally decided to reopen its embassy in Damascus. The visit also comes just weeks after Saudi Arabia and Iran decided to restore ties after years of turmoil. The development suggests that Riyadh is open to change and adjustment in the region. And if Saudi Arabia finally decides to embrace Syria, it would definitely be one of the boldest moves in the West Asia region, but it is not as easy as it looks. The opposition extends to Arab countries such as Qatar, Kuwait, and Morocco, which haven't sent aid to Syrian regime-held territories. Russia and Iran have been allies of the Assad regime. Cash-strapped Iran has so far welcomed the Arab rapprochement, but has shown no sign of reducing its military presence. And as reports suggest, the goal of countering Iran in Syria will be high up in the Arab agenda for returning Assad to the Arab and international fold. For Assad, under whom Syria is battling an economic crisis, and the earthquake fallout, the attraction is tens of billions of dollars needed to rebuild his war-ravaged country. But the Syrian president will still bargain his way through. It was proved when Assad rejected the Russian request that he meet with his Turkish counterpart, Recep Tayyip Erdogan. While the reintegration plan seems to be going smoothly so far, analysts say it will face obstacles. Even if the West gives in to lifting sanctions against Syria, the Arab countries, including Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Jordan, are unlikely to stick to their plans with respect to Damascus. While many Arab leaders remain disdainful of Assad and his actions on one hand, they also feel international policies isolating Syria are proving to be counterproductive over time. Will UAE's goodwill and its push be enough for Assad? Will Syria be back in the Arab fold soon? Only time can tell. West Asia Bureau, WION. World is one. Don't go anywhere. We have a lot more lined up for you in this edition of the West Asia Post. But first, as usual, let's check out what's making the headlines across the region.
At least 10 Yemeni soldiers were killed on Wednesday in a renewed Houthi militia offensive in central province of Marib. The new attack comes amid renewed diplomatic efforts to end the 8-year war. An Israeli air attack hit Syria's Aleppo airport, causing some material damage in the second strike on the facility this month. The Parliament of Jordan votes to recommend expulsion of Israel's ambassador to Oman in protest against Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich's comment, where he denied the existence of Palestinian people. Hundreds of Lebanese protest in Beirut after the Lebanese pound hit a new low amid a historic economic crisis that seemingly has no end in sight. Saudi Arabia announces it will be granting citizenship to select foreign nationals based on a decision to be issued by the Prime Minister as recommended by the Minister of Interior.
After restoring ties, it looks like Saudi Arabia and Iran are moving positively and rapidly. In the latest, the foreign ministers of both countries seem to be meeting soon. We tell you more in the following report.
Ramadan has begun across the world. And in a symbolic gesture, the Saudi and Iranian foreign ministers spoke over the phone to mark the beginning of the Muslim holy month. Reports said Prince Faisal bin Farhan and his Iranian counterpart Hussein Amir Abdullahian agreed to hold a bilateral meeting soon for the reopening of embassies in Riyadh and Tehran respectively.
Regarding the matter of Saudi Arabia, we will meet with the Saudi foreign minister in the near future. Until then, we agree that the technical delegations from embassies and consulates of each country should visit and begin the reopening of embassies.
Earlier, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi received an invitation from King Salman to visit Saudi Arabia. West Asia's recent history has been dominated by hostility between these two nations, so any kind of reconciliation is a huge positive. This development comes after Iran and Saudi Arabia agreed to revive relations after years of hostility. The trigger for the prolonged hostility was Saudi Arabia's execution of a prominent Shia Muslim scholar in 2016, and that led to protests in Iran against Saudi Arabia. Protesters attacked the Saudi diplomatic missions in Iran, after which Riyadh cut relations with Tehran. That was just one of the many flashpoints between the two regional rivals. Iran and Saudi Arabia have been on opposite sides of the Yemen conflict, and Houthi rebels are backed by Tehran. Riyadh leads a military coalition supporting the government. Just weeks after the signing of the agreement mediated by China, reports said that Iran has agreed to stop sending weapons to its Houthi allies in Yemen. which is a breakthrough for the civil war-ridden country and generally West Asia. Observers believe that the development could put pressure on the Houthi group to reach a deal to end the conflict. Iran's lack of weapon support to the Houthis could also mean lesser attacks on Saudi. Both sides stand to gain from de-escalation. Iran seeks to undercut US efforts to isolate it in the region, while Saudi Arabia tries to focus on economic development.
اتفاقية إعادة العلاقات الدبلوماسية.
There is no doubt that the agreement to restore the diplomatic relations with Iran is a turning point in the region towards peace with our neighbors. The kingdom is aware that it is going towards an ambitious Vision 2030 and it is trying to prepare the region for development instead of conflicts and continued problems.
Reports of Saudi Arabia reopening its embassies in Syria is another sign that Riyadh is open to being flexible with its neighbors and focus on economic and social reforms at home. The Saudi-Iran deal, if it is implemented fully, has the potential to end the rivalry between the region's biggest powerhouses. The deal can bring Iran closer to its neighbors, which will in the long run lead to regional stability. Should the process move forward, Saudi Arabia may look at investing in Iran, although this may not be to the liking of the United States. That too when Beijing is at the center of the deal between Riyadh and Tehran. The coming together of Iran and Saudi is also making Israel see red. And reports are that the UAE, which signed the Abraham Accords with Israel in 2020, is considering reducing its diplomatic presence in Tel Aviv. Thus, efforts to isolate Iran seem to be not bearing fruit, at least for now. And if Saudi Arabia and Iran continue to move forward hand in hand, it may be good news not only for the two nations, but the entire region, which has been marred by conflict for years. West Asia Bureau, WION, World is One.
And now to the boiling Israeli politics. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu softened his judicial reforms. But this doesn't look like enough for the protesters who continue to demand a rollback of the government's legal reforms. We tell you more.
For weeks, Israelis have been on the streets. They are protesting against the government's so-called judicial reforms, on which the country is sharply divided. Businesses are planning to move out, and sections of the defense forces are up in arms. There are people within the Israeli Prime Minister's own party who believe these moves to clip the powers of the judiciary under the pretext of reform have gone too far. The Biden administration has expressed its discomfort over the reforms, and that is perhaps why Netanyahu has finally decided to soften his stand. On Monday, the Israeli Prime Minister announced he would postpone most of the bill apart from legislation shaking up Israel's system for selecting judges. The government aims to pass the judicial selection bill before the Passover holiday that begins on April 5th. The rest of the reform package will not be voted on until the next Knesset session begins at the end of April. However, protests continue across Israel. Some of the protesters say the far-right coalition was undermining Israel's democracy and taking away a feeling of freedom.
I came with my friends here to Tel Aviv to demonstrate against what is called reform, against everything, every institution of our country, and I hope we will defend our democracy.
The opposition is also relentless. Opposition leaders have said they would still challenge the key legislation in the Supreme Court. The court case could set the stage for a major constitutional showdown in the country.
The moment the change to the Judicial Appointments Committee passes, We will appeal against it at the Supreme Court. The base for the appeal will be simple. If this law passes, Israel stops being a democratic state. We will not allow this to happen. The liberal camp is simply unwilling to live in a non-democratic state.
The uproar over the government's move against the judiciary has plunged Israel into one of its worst domestic crises. An attempt by Israel's ceremonial president to defuse the crisis through an alternative legal reform has so far been unsuccessful. After consulting leaders across the political spectrum, Isaac Herzog proposed a framework for compromise, which key opposition leaders accepted as a basis for negotiations. But Netanyahu turned it down, reportedly because his hardline Justice Minister Yariv Levin threatened to resign and bring down the coalition if the Prime Minister opened the door to talks. Israel's far-right Finance Minister says the judicial overhaul will strengthen democracy in all its aspects.
I'm telling you with full responsibility that the judicial reform will not, God forbid, undermine democracy, rights and freedom. All this is Handmaid's Tale. Brainwashing campaign is ridiculous, ridiculous and ridiculous.
So is Netanyahu saving the coalition or himself? Well, critics say it's all for himself and to stay in power. And the law ratified on Thursday proves the same. The ratified law now limits the circumstances in which a prime minister can be removed. This is despite worries voiced by experts that it may be meant to shield Netanyahu from the law taking its course in his corruption trial. With 15 years in power, serving as Israel's prime minister thrice, Netanyahu seems to be in trouble now, more than ever. And the relentless protests from all the sections of society are proving to be his biggest test yet.
"20 years ago, the United States of America took a decision to invade Iraq. Now 2 decades later, what is the country living? Turmoil and chaos. Who is to blame? And what did this invasion produce? The following report tells you more.
Exactly 20 years ago, the US launched the invasion of Iraq. The war began with a massive military assault on Baghdad and was followed by a full-scale invasion with strong support from the United Kingdom. Millions of people across the world sat transfixed in front of the TV screens, watching as bombs and missiles exploded in Baghdad. 2 decades on, the killings continue. The invasion was launched to end the rule of President Saddam Hussein, destroy the alleged weapons of mass destruction in the oil-rich country, and also bring democracy to the land. No weapons of mass destruction were found in Iraq as claimed by the so-called international community. Saddam Hussein was captured and executed, and Iraq remains deeply scarred with internal conflict and economic devastation. It continues to remain under the sway of Iranian and American influence. So what has changed then for Iraq after all? Nothing really. In fact, the situation has worsened as experts say. More than 200,000 Iraqi civilians are dead and chaos and instability prevail in the region. Then why was the war waged in the first place? On 20th of March 2003, the US forces landed in Baghdad. 3 weeks later, the US troops took control of Baghdad. And just after Saddam's capture, the US conceded that there were no stockpiles of chemical or nuclear weapons found in Iraq. The US officially left Iraq in 2011, leaving behind destruction, despair and anarchy. Iraq witnessed an insurgency, first by Saddam loyalists and then by Al-Qaeda. A sectarian civil war followed, and later the rise of the Islamist State, which occupied a third of Iraq and slaughtered thousands. The war left thousands of mothers crying for their children. About 4 million children were orphaned and 1 million women widowed. And not to talk about the people born in Fallujah with birth defects every day because of the depleted uranium and the phosphorus that was used by the US.
George Bush had promised that Iraq would become a paradise after the fall of the regime of Saddam Hussein. But on the contrary, we did not see this. Terrorism, al-Qaeda killings, they tried to plant sectarian divisions amid the unified Iraqi people. But we say that this event is painful for each Iraqi because we passed through huge disasters, and until now, 20 years later, we did not see anything from the promises made by the American administration.
20 years later, a semblance of normalcy has returned, but Iraq still battles a range of challenges. In today's Iraq, elections are held. Political plurality is encouraged and free expression officially guaranteed. But in practice, Iraqi politics remains chaotic and marred by sectarian and ethnic conflict.
20 years ago, nothing was achieved in Iraq, from paving streets to construction. Nothing got done in Iraq. One does not feel safe going home. Whether he will be dead or alive, he can't know. Only God is there for us.
A third of Iraq's population lives in poverty, public services are largely absent, and the energy-rich country suffers frequent blackouts, especially in the extreme summer heat.
The Americans came and said, we will give you everything you need. We'll give you full food rations, paved roads, sewage systems, and electricity. None of this happened. They just came, destroyed the country, stole Iraq's wealth and people, and then left.
Major combat operations.
20 years on, American and British leaders do not dwell on the invasion, but Iraqis have not forgotten. Despite the strides Iraq has made, it remains inherently unstable, 2 decades from the invasion that was meant to usher in democracy and make lives better. West Asia Bureau, WION World is One.
Now to end the show on a different note. As you all know, West Asia is the center for all 3 religions: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Well, Muslims around the world are marking the beginning of the holy month of Ramadan. But how is Ramadan in West Asia? Traditions, preparations, and much more. Take a look. That's all we have for you for this week on the West Asia Post. I will see you next week with a brand new lineup, always bringing you the most recent updates, stories, and ground reports from the most volatile region in the world. Until then, stay safe. I am Radi Francis signing off from Lebanon, and you're watching WION World is One.